This is the Merkava tank. Home-produced by Israel, it is the pride of the Israeli military and a symbol of its military might. It is one of the best protected tanks in the world.
I do know for sure what the Merkava is, what the Israel soldier is. And both of them can hit any other tanks and soldiers around us, no matter the numbers.
But in the modern warfare of today, guerrillas are challenging the role and the relevance of the Merkava.
A man in a ruined building with a handheld missile that was designed in the Soviet Union in the 1970s can still destroy the most up-to-the-minute digitized tank that the world has produced. And the Merkava is no exception to that.
On July 12, 2006, Hezbollah guerrillas in southern Lebanon moved across this border into Israel. Their target was a group of Israeli soldiers.
There was a unit of Israeli forces at the border. It was the last day of their duty. They were going home the next day. And no doubt, like all of us, perhaps they weren't following the instructions and their orders as precisely as they should. This was the opportunity that Hezbollah had been waiting for.
Hezbollah ambushed the Israeli unit. They killed 3 soldiers and captured the remaining 2, taking them back into Lebanese territory. The Israelis had in place a carefully worked out drill for exactly such a scenario.
Codename Hannibal was put into action. This is the drill which is implemented when soldiers are kidnapped.
Operation Hannibal involved the artillery and aerial bombardment of bridges and roads around the location of the capture. The aim was to prevent Hezbollah getting far with their captives. In the heat of the moment, a local Israeli commander ordered a Merkava tank into Lebanese territory to pursue the captors. Hezbollah was ready and waiting for such an eventuality.
After just a few meters of entering Lebanese territory, the tank ran over a landmine. It exploded, killing all 4 soldiers.
The tank and its crew had fallen into a well-laid Hezbollah trap.
What happened was a reckless decision by the commander in the field to send a Merkava to try to stop the hijacker.
A squad was sent to rescue the Merkava's crew. It was met by a Hezbollah ambush. There were more casualties. So early that day, in addition to the 2 who'd been kidnapped, Israel lost 8 soldiers. This is not an easy thing for Israel.
The losses enraged the Israelis. A cabinet meeting was hastily convened.
They decided to go to war after the chief of staff came to the cabinet and he presented his plan and he said, give me 5 days. With the Air Force alone, we are going to crash the Hezbollah. There will be no fighting capability of the Hezbollah. So they gave him 5 days.
"5 days proved to be an overconfident estimation of Israel's ability to crush Hezbollah. Israel continued to come under attack from Hezbollah rockets. Israel's relentless bombing campaign was not working.
It didn't succeed because Hezbollah had been preparing for this prospect. It had been preparing by building bunkers, tunnels, using caves.
No one, not even the Israelis, knew anything about this network of tunnels, 20 to 30 meters deep in places. They had everything inside them: rocket launchers, ammunition, food, water, all they needed.
After 8 days of aerial bombing, and with Hezbollah still firing rockets, Israel decided to send ground troops into Lebanon. Israel had withdrawn its troops from the occupation of Lebanon only 6 years earlier. Now the Israelis were going back in, supported by columns of Israel's celebrated Merkava tank. The Merkava was the pride of Israel's armored corps. The Israelis considered it to be the best tank in the world. But it was to face stiff resistance from Hezbollah guerrillas.
The problem was that in front of the Merkava was little units, soldiers, foot soldiers, with anti-tank missile. And even the Merkava couldn't handle the advance of the new anti-tank missile. Even the Merkava can't do it.
The Israelis were surprised by Hezbollah's new weaponry. The modern Russian-made anti-tank missiles Hezbollah was using had been acquired from Syria and Iran. Hezbollah was using them with deadly effectiveness. The Lebanon War was going increasingly high-tech.
Israel developed the Merkava and turned it into a symbol of Israeli military technology. It showed it off to all the armies of the world. It became a legend. And so, in response to this, Hezbollah acquired weapons with the aim of destroying the Merkava. They developed, and we developed too, and we surprised them.
Hezbollah fighters were waiting in tunnels and bunkers. To the surprise of the Israelis, they kept emerging like ghosts to strike the tanks entering Lebanese villages.
Hezbollah was waiting for the tanks, and they knew exactly how to hit them. They knew exactly where the soft spots are, and they used missiles, and we have lost several of the tanks and a lot of soldiers.
Such losses were of great concern to the Israelis. The Merkava tank was a powerful symbol of Israel's military superiority. Yet well-armed and well-trained Hezbollah guerrillas were firing at the tanks from very close range and scoring direct hits. It seemed as if the ghosts of a past war were coming back to haunt the Israelis.
The Israelis were facing another war, a war like that of '73. Its opponents had determination and modern weapons, and so the Merkava was in a situation against Hezbollah fighters similar to that of Israeli tanks against Egyptian infantry in '73.
The 1973 Arab-Israeli War was known by the Arabs as the October War and by the Israelis as the Yom Kippur War. It had been a painful lesson for Israel, and in particular the Israeli Tank Corps. 6 years earlier, the Israelis had comprehensively defeated the Arab armies in the Six-Day War. However, by 1973, the Egyptians had rearmed, mindful of Israel's mastery of tank warfare.
The
Soviet Union supplied us with large numbers of anti-tank guided missiles. They were distributed to all levels of Egyptian infantry units.
The Israeli Tank Corps at that time consisted of American-made Patton and British-made Centurion tanks, which the Israelis had upgraded. Israel did not yet have its own tank. On October the 6th, 1973, thousands of Egyptian soldiers crossed the Suez Canal in an attempt to reclaim the Sinai captured by Israel 6 years earlier. The Israelis sent in their tanks to repel the attack.
And
The Israelis expected that the Egyptian infantry would run away as soon as a tank approached, but this time no one was running.
The Israelis attacked in their usual tactics, and they were met by an incredible barrage of handheld anti-tank wire-guided missiles.
This was the first time in history the anti-tank guided missiles had been used in war.
They lost many tanks, and this was a shock to them. We learned later that most of the Egyptians who came over, those kids, were carrying an anti-tank missile.
The Soviet-made wire-guided anti-tank missiles used by the Egyptians proved stunningly effective. Israel lost hundreds of tanks during the 1973 war. This cemetery in Tel Aviv holds the graves of many of those tank crewmen killed in that war. The Israelis had paid a high price for failing to take heed of new innovations in anti-tank weaponry. This sobering experience was the catalyst for a momentous decision. Israel would build its own tank, a tank that would become known as the Merkava. A telling symbol of the high price paid by the Israeli Tank Corps in the 1973 war can be seen here at the Armored Forces Museum at Latrun, just outside of Jerusalem. This wall lists the names of all Israeli tank crew members killed in all of Israel's wars, starting from 1948. The largest section of this wall is devoted to those killed in the 1973 war. Israel was determined never again to lose so many casualties. After the war, the Israelis formed a committee to work on the design of a new tank, a tank specially designed to counter the tactics and the weapons of Israel's enemies. A former commander of the Israeli armored forces was charged with leading the development team. His name was General Israel Tal.
What was unique about Israel Tal was that he was intelligent, but also egotistical. He wanted to show the Israeli people and the whole world that he could design the perfect tank, a tank which could never be hit by any missile, and which could hit any soldier, whoever he was.
A genius when it comes to tanks, one of the leading experts in the world.
He was the guy who think and, as a matter of fact, push the whole idea to the tank until the very first tank. It was like a personal crusade for him.
The design of the Merkava placed a premium on the survival of the crew. One of the tank's most important features was that, unlike other tanks, the engine was at the front rather than at the rear. This meant the crew would be sitting behind the engine when the tank was moving forward.
It's innovation as a kind of protection. This is protection for the crew. It's a very nice idea.
The idea was that every piece of equipment in that tank, not just the armor, should be used to defend the crew.
Having a forward engine also allowed extra space for infantry. Unlike other tanks, the Merkava doubled as a troop transporter. Its rear door design enabled up to 6 fully equipped soldiers to be carried safely into combat. The rear door also provided an escape route.
The tank plays a secondary role as an armored personnel carrier. The infantry can leave the tank, fight anti-tank crews, and clear the way for the tank to advance.
The new design contained other innovative features. It was lower than other tanks, making it a more difficult target. Crucially, the tank was plated with special reactive armor.
The tank was 63 tons, heavier than any other tank in the world. But Israel Tal said, I don't care about maneuverability. All I care about is protecting my crew.
The crew compartment was very luxurious, with air conditioning, cold drinking water and extra space for the crew. The soldier in the Merkava is definitely the most comfortable soldier in any tank in the world.
With the design complete, the new tank needed a name that, like the tank itself, would strike fear into Israel's enemies. The name chosen was Merkava.
It was attended by biblical phantoms of power. I mean, it was a highly modern piece of cutting-edge technology, but it was also expressed in sort of archaic biblical terms. I mean, the word Merkava, it means chariot, but it also implies God. It's about theology. It's a piece of the word of God on tracks, tearing over the terrain.
With its religious reference, the Merkava, or God's chariot, was to be a weapon offering a divine-like protection to Israel, and one that would smash its enemies.
When the Israelis used the word with religious connotations for the Merkava, they took it out of its historical context. They surrounded it with an aura. It became unique, terrifying, almost untouchable.
In 1979, the Merkava Mark I rolled off the assembly line, ready for action. Ironically, it was that same year that Israel made peace with Egypt, the country that in 1973 had provided the catalyst for the Merkava project. However, the Israelis were not slow to find other reasons to justify the importance and the cost of developing the Merkava.
The Merkava is some kind of an independence flag we wave. We need it for, in case of other countries will sanction us or embargo us, we needed to maintain our policy. Even other countries oppose us.
And it wasn't long before Israeli policy had need of the Merkava. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to crush Palestinian guerrillas there and to install a friendly government in Beirut. The Merkava was put into action for the first time. The new Merkava formed the spearhead of the Israeli advance into Lebanon. The Israelis soon reached the outskirts of the capital, Beirut, but it wasn't all easy going. In eastern Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, a column of Israeli tanks ran into a Syrian force near the village of Sultan Yaqub, just south of the main Beirut-Damascus highway. The local mayor was an eyewitness to what happened next. He showed us the site where the fierce tank battle took place here in the early hours of June the 11th, 1982.
The Israelis were coming from this direction, heading towards the Beirut-Damascus highway. Here was the battlefield. It was a horrible night. I will never forget it.
The Syrians later claimed to have destroyed over 20 Israeli tanks. This memorial was erected on the spot where the Syrians managed to halt the Israeli advance.
The Syrians surprised the Israelis by using the new Soviet-made T-72 tank in the Battle of Sultan Yaqub. It was much better in its caliber and range than the Merkava Mark I.
Despite the setback of Sultan Yaqub, the Merkava was judged to have performed well. It had reduced the level of Israeli losses.
The Merkava was a success in 1982. The casualty figures were far lower than in the 1973 war.
But the Israeli losses in Lebanon meant that the Merkava was still not the supreme tank General Israel Tal had dreamed of. As a result, the Israelis went back to the drawing board. They made upgrades to the original Merkava. The Merkava Mark II was created in 1983. 7 years later, the Merkava Mark III appeared. The new features included a higher caliber gun and armor upgrades. But as the tank underwent upgrades over the years, large-scale tank warfare was beginning to look more a thing of the past. 1991 witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union. For decades, the chief military supplier of Israel's Arab opponents. And that same year, another threat to Israel, the army of Iraq, was seriously weakened in the Gulf War. In the Merkava, Israel had arguably one of the best tanks in the world. But who was it designed to be used against?
Military planners have a fatal tendency in all states and regimes to plan for the last war. They don't plan for the next one. The problem is that the next sort of war that comes along is not about large masses of tanks meeting on an open plain. You know, it's not Hollywood. It's suddenly guerrilla warfare. It's controlling civilian populations who are finding all sorts of ways of getting back at you that are nothing to do with high-tech machines. So basically, the Merkava was designed for a moment that passed during the same period as the design process was going ahead.
The Israelis refused to consider the Merkava obsolete. Israel was spending roughly $220 million a year on the Merkava tank program. Its continued use was seen as maintaining Israel's military edge. The Merkava was soon given a new role, not in the open field of battle, but in the densely packed civilian neighborhoods of the West Bank and Gaza, following the eruption of the Second Palestinian Intifada in the year 2000. Israel's high-tech battle tank was to face a new challenge. Israel had made peace with Egypt in 1979. The Iraqi army had been crushed in the 1991 Gulf War. Israel had signed peace accords with the Jordanians and the Palestinians. Then, in late 2000, the Second Palestinian Intifada erupted. The Merkava was soon deployed in support of Israeli military operations in the West Bank and Gaza. The tactics were heavy-handed, and according to some Israelis, ineffective.
You can't reach guerrilla movements in the narrow streets of the refugee camps. Even if you have a modern tank like the Merkava, they just can't maneuver. What can a tank do in front of a child carrying a stone or a Molotov cocktail?
The use of large-scale tanks in civilian applications actually creates a great sense of antagonism and hostility. This alienates, this makes people angry, and promotes in them a desire to find other ways to hit back.
The Palestinians in the occupied territories had learned new ways to fight. There were still the young boys throwing stones, which had characterized the first Palestinian Intifada in 1987. But increasingly, the Israelis found themselves facing a new generation of Palestinian guerrillas. This new generation of guerrillas had lived under the yoke of Israeli occupation. They were familiar with Israeli military operations, and they used all means at their disposal to obtain crucial information on fighting their enemy.
There are Israeli websites showing photos and other information about the Merkava. They are proud of it and want to show it off. We visited these sites and learned of its strong and its weak points.
The belly of the tank is not as well armored as the sides or the front. This is the weakest part, the belly.
In home workshops like these, Palestinians worked to produce weapons. The aim? To attack the Merkava.
So explosives were available both in West Bank and in Gaza. The exercise was really to foresee and to estimate the positioning in which to put the explosives and to find some effective way for initiating the explosives.
In Gaza, one paramilitary faction, the Salahuddin Brigade, took on the challenge of striking at the Merkava. We met the fighters who explained how they planned and executed a classic ambush along this road close to what was once the Jewish settlement of Natsarim in February 2002.
We carefully observed the Merkava for 2 months, and one day we decided to attack it. We planted 2 mines on the road, a small one of 30 kilos and a larger one of 120 kilos. The small mine targeted a military convoy which was coming out of the Israeli settlement of Natsarim. This exploded, and as we had predicted, a Merkava tank was sent to rescue the convoy. When it approached, we detonated the larger mine. The tank was cut into pieces and the crew killed.
This was the first Merkava to be destroyed in Gaza. The Israelis were shocked. The Palestinian guerrillas saw this attack as a significant step forward in their resistance to Israeli occupation.
Praise be to God. We were happier than ever before. The Palestinian people were now confident that this monster, the Merkava, could be destroyed.
Another Palestinian faction in Gaza took inspiration from this attack on the Merkava. 7 months after the first attack, the Al-Quds Brigade targeted a Merkava tank which was patrolling the Rafah border area in southern Gaza. At the exact location, they told us how they carried out their attack in September 2002.
We were very jealous of the fact that other groups had destroyed the Merkava, and so we decided to try to destroy one too. We only had an old RPG-7, but we decided to use it against the Merkava, as we knew that the back door was one of its weak points.
The opportunity came when the tank turned and its back door was facing us. We fired the RPG, which penetrated the back door. The shells inside the tank exploded, creating a massive bang.
The blast was so huge that massive fragments of metal from the destroyed tank scattered across the area, smashing holes in the border wall the Israelis had built. An area that had been frequently shot at by the Israeli army now bore the shrapnel marks from a destroyed Merkava.
We celebrated and distributed sweets to all our relatives and friends. At first the Merkava was like a miracle, but now it's something normal, like any other armored vehicles.
Other Merkava tanks were targeted by Palestinian militants. A week after the strike by the Al-Quds Brigade, another Merkava was blown up by a landmine close to Al-Mughazi refugee camp. The explosion was so powerful that to this day the soil still remains discolored on the exact spot where the tank was destroyed. These Palestinian shepherd boys showed us what they said were remnants from the destroyed tank. Such successful strikes against the Merkava in Gaza, though exceptional, nevertheless demonstrated that the legendary tank was not invincible. A chink in Israel's armor had been detected. Hezbollah was quick to pick up on these lessons when Israel invaded Lebanon in the summer of 2006. Like the Palestinians, Hezbollah made it their aim to damage what was still a powerful symbol of Israel's technological might. As in 1982, the Israelis decided to spearhead their incursion into Lebanon with tanks. And as in 1982, the Merkava was the principal instrument through which Israel implemented its version of Blitzkrieg, a lightning war in which the Israeli army sought to win all of its battles quickly, decisively, and with the fewest possible casualties. Israel's major ground assault into Lebanon was launched on two fronts. Neither of them was an obvious choice for tanks.
The terrain in the south is ideal guerrilla country. It is hilly, it is often well covered with trees and undergrowth. It has caves, it has tunnels. It was ideal territory for people who know the ground and understand the area very well, and extremely difficult for an invader who does not know the ground as well.
The Israelis first crossed the border from the Metula settlement and advanced through this valley beneath the village of Al-Khiyam. Hezbollah guerrillas, hiding in the surrounding hills and villages, fired their anti-tank missiles at the Israeli tanks advancing below.
That incursion of tanks reached about 3.5 kilometers before that was halted by missile attack.
Hezbollah was using the latest Metis and Kornet anti-tank missiles. Manufactured in Russia, the missiles had the ability to pierce even the heavy armor of the Merkava. After losing several tanks and sustaining casualties, the Israelis chose to advance via a different route. This second thrust took them through this area, called Wadi Lahjar.
It was a little, small wadi, narrow valley, that curved like a snake. The Israeli tanks got trapped in this small wadi, and many were destroyed by Hezbollah. And of course, find it very difficult to bypass or get past either the lead tanks that had been destroyed or some of the rear tanks that had been destroyed. And that left them in a very difficult situation, and they had to retreat.
Back in Israel itself, Israelis were still coming under attack from Hezbollah rockets. After 33 days of war, Israel had failed to achieve its goals of destroying Hezbollah and winning back 2 of its soldiers captured at the very beginning of the latest fighting. Hezbollah claimed victory.
المقاومة اليوم تملك أكثر من 20,000 صاروخ.
Here in Israel, the mood was somber. Serious questions were raised about the level of the army's preparedness and performance. The government set up a commission of inquiry to investigate and draw lessons from Israel's failures in its 2006 war in Lebanon. According to the Israelis, of the 370 Merkava tanks involved in the war, 49 of them had been hit by Hezbollah. God's chariot was not living up to its name or its reputation. Beyond its technical and military capabilities, Israel's main battle tank, the Merkava, is a potent weapon of psychological warfare. It is a statement of Israel's military power and a symbol of Israel's determination to dominate the Arabs. Israelis were only too keen to publicize this power. Promotional videos extolling the Merkava's benefits were posted on the internet. Yet Israel
It was a matter of determination. Hezbollah fighters would not fire their anti-tank missiles until they were 100% sure they could strike a Merkava. Some Merkavas were destroyed from only 20 meters away.
The issue was not the technology of the missiles, as the Israelis claimed after the war. The issue was determination, creativity, and innovation in the battlefield.
Even some Israelis believe the mental qualities displayed by Hezbollah guerrillas proved an advantage, despite the fact they were outgunned.
If you are handling a situation in a battlefield when the Merkava is against some half-Shahid, it's a problem. It's a matter of determination, not a matter of a well-designed tank, which the Merkava is.
Israel had years of experience fighting Hezbollah during its 22-year occupation of South Lebanon. Yet in the Merkava, the Israelis were still deploying a weapon originally designed in the 1970s for large-scale tank warfare between nation-states.
The Israelis used to rely on tanks because they manifested their prestige. But after the Lebanon War, this is not the case to the same extent. Israel's enemy today is not an army like that of Syria or Egypt, but rather guerrilla movements.
Guerrilla warfare usually pits a smaller force against a conventionally more powerful enemy, as in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq today. Hezbollah could not destroy the Israeli army, but in targeting the Merkava tank, it was sapping Israel's strength and morale in southern Lebanon.
With respect to resistance movements, they can never defeat their enemies, but they can exhaust them. All the major powers must realize that no matter how sophisticated their technology may become, the human factor can still defeat them.
Fighting on their own soil, the Hezbollah guerrillas possessed a sense of purpose, which some analysts feel Israel lacked.
When the Israeli soldier is defending Israel itself, he has a motivation because he is defending his land. But when he goes to fight in Lebanon, Sinai, the Golan, he is an invader and therefore doesn't have the same motivation.
Israeli troops on the ground didn't really believe in the project. There was no great sort of sense of mission or moral duty. This was, in a sense, a punishment operation.
Right now, I think that some Israelis are not sure what is the aim, why we are fighting for.
Such uncertainty about Israel's aims is casting doubt on the very basics of Israeli military doctrine and the continued use of the Merkava. Drawing lessons from the 2006 war in Lebanon, Israel is revising its military tactics. Its version of blitzkrieg has become outdated in today's battlefield. Israeli soldiers are today training for warfare that will rely less on tanks and more on infantry. These exercises are conducted on terrain similar to that of southern Lebanon. Other environments are also simulated. This is a mock Arab town, specially constructed by the Israeli army for military exercises. These soldiers are practicing street fighting. The setting is similar to that of towns in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. After more than 3 decades of research, investment, and development, the Merkava project is now at a crossroads.
There's been a debate in Israel over the last few years about whether we should continue to manufacture the Merkava or not. We spend a lot of money on the Merkava, and Israel is a small country.
Military analysts estimate that $6.5 billion has been spent on the development and continued upgrading of the Merkava tank since the 1970s. Yuri Milstein is one of the critics of the philosophy behind the Merkava tank. He believes such spending is an unjustified extravagance.
The United States offered to sell us their Abrams tank, but the Minister of Defense and Israel Tal refused this offer. They chose instead to continue investing in the Merkava project.
But supporters of the Merkava do not want Israel to be dependent on anyone, even its closest ally, the United States. These supporters argue that the Merkava remains an essential part of Israel's military arsenal.
It's our baby. Why to kill it?
Beyond the debate about the costs and politics of the Merkava program lie other issues. Questions have been raised about whether Israel's main battle tank is compromising rather than consolidating Israel's long-term security.
There would be an incursion, often accompanied by tanks, into a West Bank town like Jenin. And then at the end of the operation, Israel would come out and they would say, well, that's been a success. There were 10 terrorists in Jenin, and we've killed 6, and now there are only 4 left. And I would go and talk to the people in Jenin, and they say, well, you know, before this operation, there were about 10 terrorists in Jenin, and the Israelis came in and killed them, and now there are 24 terrorists in Jenin.
You are not supposed to use tanks against human beings. You are not supposed to use tanks against guerrillas who are waiting in the bushes. If you want to use tanks, use it against tanks. This is the only way to succeed.
The Merkava has become an emblem of Israel, and the debate about its future is emblematic of the difficult choices Israeli society is confronting.
It's correct to think of Merkava as a symbol of Israel. Israel as a country wanted to model itself on the Merkava, to be strong on the outside and have a population living in comfort on the inside. And like the Merkava, to be ruthless and accurate in its ability to destroy its enemies.
The tank, like the wall the Israelis are building around the West Bank, epitomizes Israel's attempt to ensure its own security. The danger is that the pursuit of military domination and secure isolation is ultimately unattainable, and may in fact preclude any chance of achieving peace.
There is another critique of the Merkava, if I can put it that way, which is really about using military machinery to achieve what one might hope would be done through conciliation or discussion or negotiation or diplomacy. The energy that had been put into developing this piece of military technology had been used, even a fraction of it, to sort of think about other ways of, doing conciliation. It would be helpful.
One Israeli who knows all about the need for reconciliation is Arilova Eliav. As a young man, he fought in the First Arab-Israeli War to establish the State of Israel. In later years, he became less of a militant and more interested in seeking peace. He still believes that diplomacy and concession are the only way to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict and sow the seeds of peace.
Having a strong army, yes, sure enough, but start talking and come to a compromise. There is no, the essence of peace is a compromise. It's the very essence of peace.
As in the past, Israel will continue to adapt its fighting techniques and upgrade its weapons in the belief that its security lies in military strength. God's chariot, the Merkava, has failed to provide this security.